Hey everyone, welcome back. Johnny B here with Devslopes.com, and we are continuing with our Legend of Devslopes game, and it's shaping up pretty nice. In the last video, we got ready to start working with our game manager. We created our spawn points, and now we are ready to dive right into the code of our game manager and really set it up to where we have an actual game. You know, with a game, you need goals. You need the player to have something to work towards. And so in our game, how it's going to work is we are going to try and survive up to level 20. So each level, it's going to become more difficult as more enemies spawn each level. So on level 1, we're going to spawn 1 enemy. Level 2, 2 enemies. Level 3, 3 enemies, so on and so forth. And as you kill all of the enemies for that level, you'll have a brief break, and then they'll just keep coming right back at you after that. All right, so that's how we are going to structure the game. So let's go ahead and open up the game manager script. And so I just opened it right here from the game manager game object, and double clicking on the script. I'm going to drag that over. Okay, and let's make this font bigger. All right, that looks good. Okay, so we need our game manager to manage all of this logic. It needs to know how many enemies are on the screen at any given point. It needs to know what level we're on. It needs to keep track of how often and where to spawn the enemies. So we need to be able to provide all of that logic to it. All right. So first thing we're going to need is we're going to need to add a few more serialized fields so that it has access to the spawn points as well as to our 3 enemies. So we're going to say serialize field, and first one is going to be an array of game objects, which are the spawn points. Next up, we have a serialize fields for each of the enemies. So this first one we're going to call tanker, and I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to try and write that serialized field that trips me up every single time. So we're going to have a tanker, a ranger, and a soldier. Okay. And then we're also going to have a UI element down in the right hand corner that keeps track of our levels for us. So after we kill the first enemy, it'll increment to level 2, level 3, and so each level will be able to see our progress. All right, so we're going to say text, and that imported Unity engine.ui for us, and we're going to call that level text. And let's go ahead and add all of these serialized fields. So I'm going to press Command S to save. Then we're going to switch back to our Unity editor and wait for our for the editor to catch up. And so we have now slots for our enemies, a slot for the level text, and a slot for the spawn points. So with our spawn points, we said that it's going to be an array. So if you click the triangle, it then provides you a slot to specify how many items are going to be in this array. So we have 4 spawn points, so I'm going to say 4, then press enter, and then it'll pop down 4 slots. And so then we can just look at our spawn points in our, whoops, we lost our game manager, so I'm going to go back to our game manager, and we're just going to drag in each spawn point into a slot. So the first spawn point into element 0, second into element 1, and so on and so forth until you have added all of the elements. Okay, good. Then for our tanker, ranger, and soldier, we are going to drag in our prefabs. We're going to drag in the tanker for the tanker, soldier for the soldier, and ranger for the ranger. And now we have a slot for the level text, right? So let's go ahead and add that. So just like we did when we were adding our heart and our health bar, we're going to work in the 2D and on our canvas. So I'm going to come back to our HUD. I'm going to press F while hovering with my mouse over the scene, so that it gives us the whole area. And I think down here in the right hand corner is where we want to have our level. And so I'm going to right click on HUD, and I'm going to say, or I'm going to expand HUD, right click and say UI, and we just want text. Okay. So by default, it's going to be in gray, Arial, and right here in the center, and pretty small. So let's go ahead and let's just bump up our font size to, let's try maybe 60. Oh, not 6014, just 60. And then we'll need to increase the size. So there we have it. I'm gonna just drag it over down here. And I think we can do bigger than that. Let's try maybe 70. And I am aligning it with the health bar. And then here in the alignment, I'm going to choose right here the middle alignment vertically. And let's change our color to maybe like a light gray, or a light close to white. And then we'll give it a shadow. So with add component clicked, I'm going to type in shadow and then select shadow. And then the effect color, let's go with a red, kind of a dark red. And increase the distance in the X to 3 and 3. There we go. I think that looks cool. So this is still a little too small, I think. So let's go ahead and bump it up to 80. All right, that looks good enough. And we're going to say here level 1 to start out. Now, Unity only comes with the Arial font, which is pretty boring. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a new font. So I'm going to create a new folder in the assets, right clicking on assets, create folder, and I'm going to call this folder fonts. Okay, so now open up your folder that has your Legend of Devslopes assets, find the fonts folder, and we're going to use the God of War font. All right, so drag that into fonts. And so now we have that in our project. And just to give credit, I'm going to type in God of War font. And I got this from the font. And so here is the site, and it is available here. So you guys can come to defont.com and get the font here. So that's where I got it, and so providing attribution here. Okay. All right. So now back to our text field. Let's go ahead and rename that level text. And let's choose a new font for it. So here under character and font, I'm going to use the circle select and choose the God of War. All right, that looks cooler. And you know what? Looking at it down here, actually it looks okay. I think that'll be all right. So that looks good. Anything else we want to adjust with this? Color's fine. Font size looks good. Font style, maybe bold. No, normal looked better. All right, so normal. And I think that does it for our level text. All right, that looks good. So I'm going to exit out of the 2D right here, clicking. I'm going to select our hero, and back in the scene, I'm going to press F to bring us back down to our level. Okay, so that looks good. We just created our level text, and so I'm going to head back to our game manager. And now with that we have created our level text, I can drag that into the level text slot. All right, perfect. So I'm going to save that. And now we have most of the items that we're going to be needing to continue coding. So I'm going to open back up our game manager script. And now we need to define a few variables. So we need to keep track of which level we're on. So I'm going to say private int current level. We're going to need to keep track of the time between enemy spawns. So I'm going to say private float and generated spawn time. And we're going to set that equal to 1 to start out. And so that just means that the enemies will spawn 1 second after another. Okay. And then set private float current spawn time, and we're going to initialize that to 0. So this is going to be used in conjunction with the timer. It's just going to keep track of when the last spawn point time was, and then we're going to compare that with the generated spawn time. All right, and then we're going to say private game object, and this is going to be the new enemy that is spawned each time. Okay, so that looks good. And then we need just a couple more lists, and so we need these lists. We're going to call one enemies and one killed enemies. And so when we're playing and the game manager is spawning new enemies, each time a new enemy is spawned, we're going to add it to this list. And this is the list that is going to be compared with the current level. And then we're going to have a second list called killed enemies. And each time we kill an enemy, we're going to add it to that list. And that's going to keep track of how many enemies we've killed. All right. So we're going to need private list. And this is going to be of type enemy health. Okay. So I'll explain this in a second. So private list enemy health, we're going to call it enemies and new list enemy health. Then a second list, also of type enemy health. This is going to be killed enemies. And this is also a new list of type enemy health. Okay, so hang in there with me. I'm going to come back to these, but first we need to create a couple of functions to make this all make sense. So I'm going to create a couple of public functions, and the first one is called register enemy, and we are going to pass into it an enemy health, and we're going to call it enemy. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to take the list enemies that we created above, and we're going to add that. And what we're going to add is the enemy that is passed into this function. Okay, and then we're going to create a second function that is similar, and we're going to call it killed enemy. And we are passing into it an enemy health called enemy. And we are going to add that enemy to killed, or we're adding to killed enemies the enemy that is passed into it. Okay. So what we have here is we've created a public function inside of our game manager that can be accessed from other scripts, and we're going to be actually accessing this from the enemy health script. That's why the type here is of type enemy health. And so let's jump over to our enemy health script, which is open right here. And in enemy health, so each time that an enemy is spawned, it is spawned with all of its components, with each of these scripts. And so inside enemy health, on start, I'm going to call the public function called register enemy that we just created. So I'm going to say game manager.instance.register enemy, and I'm going to pass in this, being the game object that has just been spawned. So right when it's spawned, we are going to call game manager.instance.register enemy, and we're passing in this enemy's game object. So then over in game manager, it receives that that function call, and we are passing in that enemy. And so then we are adding that enemy to this list of enemies. So now we know how many enemies are spawned at any point during the game. So that's how we're going to keep track of how many enemies have been spawned into the level. All right. So hopefully that's making sense. And then we have our killed enemies list and our killed enemy function. So then back in enemy health, when we kill an enemy, when it dies, we are going to call game manager dot instance dot killed enemy, and we're passing in this object, so that back in our game manager, each time we kill an enemy, that enemy is passed into this killed enemies array. And so that's how we're going to keep track of how many enemies we've killed each level. All right, so hopefully that's starting to come together, and you're seeing, you know, how this is going to actually play out and work for us. Okay, I'm going to go back to enemy health and save that. Back to game manager. And so in start, we're going to initialize current level equal to 1. We're going to start on 1. And in update, what we're going to do is we are going to say current spawn time plus equal to time dot delta time. And this is just that timer that keeps track of how long it's been since the past spawn time. Okay. So now we have pretty much everything we need to get started to write our coroutine that is going to actually handle how many enemies and when and where to spawn. Okay, so we're going to use a coroutine for that. And so we're going to say enumerator, and we are going to call it spawn. And before we get started into the code, I want us to kind of think about this and write a little bit of pseudocode to think about it. And I would like, after we write this pseudocode, I want you to pause the video and take a crack at it yourself, okay? So I'm going to kind of describe the process of the checks that you need to make, of the variables you need to set, and then you go and try to do it on your own. Take a crack at it, and then if you get stuck, come on back here and we'll go through it together, okay? All right, so have you done that? All right, so here's the pseudocode. And when I say pseudocode, it's kind of a term to say, you know, I'm writing out in plain English what I want the code to do. So what we're going to do is in our coroutine spawn, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check that spawn time is greater than the current time. Or in other words, has it been more than 1 second since the last enemy was spawned? If so, we're going to check if there are less enemies on screen than the current level. And if so, randomly select a spawn point and spawn a random enemy. So we're going to pick a random spawn point, and we're going to randomly instantiate one of our 3 enemies at that spawn point. But if we have killed the same, let me get that down to the middle, if we have killed the same number of enemies as the current level, or in other words, we're on level 1 and we've killed 1 person, then we need to clear out the enemies and killed enemies arrays, increment the current level by 1, and start over. Start this coroutine over, all right? So go ahead, take a crack at it, and then come on back here when you've finished, or if you've gotten stuck, and we will go through it together now, okay? So, like I said in our pseudocode, first thing we're going to do is do a check to make sure that the current spawn time is greater than the generated spawn time. And if so, we are going to immediately set the current spawn time back to 0 so that the counter can restart. Then we are going to check to see if there are less enemies on screen than the current level. So if enemies.count, so this is the enemies array that we are adding to each time we spawn an enemy that we added in enemy health. Okay, so if that array count is greater or is less than current level, then we're going to spawn some more enemies. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an integer that is we're going to call it random number, and this is going to be our spawn point integer index. So we're going to say random dot range, and we're going to pass in 0 and spawn points dot length -1, and so that's just going to create a random number between 1 and 4, or between 0 and 3. All right, so that's, oops, I need my semicolon. So we've created our random number int, and we're going to then say int spawn point is equal to that random number. Then we're going to say game object. We're going to create a spawn location, and that spawn location is going to be one of the spawn points that we have that we have created, and then we're going to pass in that random number that we just created. In fact, we don't need double work here, so we're just going to create, this is going to be random number. There we go. So there we go, we got our game object spawn location, and we are randomly picking one of our 4 spawn points. So now we are going to create a new random integer, and this is going to be random enemy. And so we are going to say random dot range, and we're going to pass in 0 and 3. Okay, so now we have a random enemy integer that we can instantiate one of our 3 enemies randomly. Okay, so then we are going to say if random enemy is equal to 0, our new enemy, so now we're actually to the point where we are creating an enemy from our prefab. So we say new enemy, or we say new enemy is equal to, and we're going to instantiate. So instantiate is a function that returns a copy of the object original. Okay, so we are instantiating a soldier, and we are casting it as a game object. Good. Else if random enemy is equal to 1, then our new enemy is going to be an instantiation of our ranger. Whoops. And that is going to be casted as a game object. Else if random enemy is equal to 2, then our last enemy is a instantiate, that's going to be a tanker. All right, and then lastly we are going to move our new, whoops, that's not what I want, new enemy dot transform dot position. Now we're just setting the position of our new enemy equal to the spawn location dot transform dot position. So we're just setting the position of our new enemy that we just created to the same location as the spawn point that it's spawning from. All right, so that is some good code right there. So what we've done is we created a random number that corresponds to a spawn point. We created a random enemy integer that corresponds to 0, 1, or 2 that corresponds to our enemies that we created slots for as serialized fields. And then we created those enemies and set their position equal to the spawn location. Okay, so we just finished up our first bit of our pseudocode, but now we need to do the check to whether we have killed the same number of enemies as the current level. Okay, so outside of our first if statement, now we say if our killed enemies dot count is equal to the current level. So if it's level 1 and we've killed 1 enemy, then we're ready to go to the next level. If we've killed 2 enemies and the current level is 2, then we're ready to go to level 3. So if killed enemies dot count is equal to current level, what do we want to do? Well, we want to clear our enemies and our killed enemies arrays because we need to reset those counts. Okay, so enemies dot clear, and that's just a function, a method of the list array. So we're going to say clear, and that does that. Then we're going to clear the killed enemies array, clear. Then, because we don't want to immediately jump into the next level, you know, you kill your enemy and right away you got a whole new wave, we're going to give ourselves a little bit of a breather. So we're going to say yield return new wait 4 seconds. And I think about 3 seconds will be good. We'll check that out during play. And then we're going to increase our current level by 1. We're going to increment it. And we are going to set our level text to our new level. So level text dot text is equal to, and we'll say level plus the current level integer. All right, so I think that is looking pretty good. And last, we need to say yield return null and start our coroutine. There's going to be another recursive function, another recursive coroutine. And lastly, we need to also start it in the start function. So we're going to say start coroutine attack or spawn, and there we go. All right, I'm going to save that, and I think that should do it. So let's go ahead and we've saved it. Let's hop over to our Unity. I'm going to disable all of our enemy objects that we have in the scene so far. So I'm going to say the tanker. First, I'm going to make sure that we don't have any unsaved changes in our prefabs. So I'm going to say tanker, apply, then I'm going to disable. Soldier, apply, disable. Ranger, apply, disable. All right, moment of truth. So when I press play, we should start having some enemies show up. All right, so one guy spawned right here, but he is he's not going anywhere. I wonder why he's not moving. I wonder if he's just stuck. So since we're using prefabs, we need to actually modify our enemy move script to reference the player target from the game manager code itself. So with our enemy, so go ahead and let's just open up our enemy move script. So I'm going to drag this back over here, and in our enemy move, so instead of directly having a slot for our transform player, we're going to just make this private actually. And then here in start, we are going to say player is equal to game manager dot instance dot player. Okay, and so that's the reference to the player that we created here in our game manager. All right, so that's what we need to do to fix that problem. So let's go ahead and jump back into our game, and first let's fix this level guy that was jumping up over here. So let's go to our scene, select 2D, and let's grab our level text and press F over here. And I think the problem is that we don't have it pinned. So what we're going to do is we are going to say, let's pin you to the bottom right so that your anchor is now there. Then we're going to, we can increase your height to say 200 and adjust it again. And let's adjust you further. And I want it to be, there we go. I want it to be level with the health bar. Okay, there we go. So let's give that a try. Play. Then we're going to say player is equal to game manager dot instance dot player, and the player in game manager is a game object, and we need its position. So we're going to say player dot transform, and that should do it because we declared our player here as a transform. All right, so save that and jump back into the editor, and let's give that one more try. Okay, so we got them spawning, and now they're coming at us. So we're going to... Alright, so one down. In a couple seconds, we increment to level 2. We need to add a space here in the level, and we should have... We got one enemy, and here's another. So we're going to kill them. So we've killed 2. Now we should increment to level 3. We should now have 3 enemies coming at us. So 1, 2. Where's our third guy at? He must have spawned from this one far over here. Okay, so now we have 3. And this is pretty getting pretty crazy already. So we're gonna kill these guys. Increment to 4. Oh, looks like I got hit there. Alright, so looks like things are working great. We got some value. We got some assertion failed value was nulls. Let's see here. Oh, these assertions, because we changed how we were referencing the player, we no longer have a serialized field for our player. So this assert dot is not null. That can just go away. So I'm going to save that. And I'm gonna not have it maximize on play, and just to make sure that we don't have any further failures, it looks like our console is clear and our enemies are spawning as we expect. So I think everything is looking good. Alright, so you guys, we got like pretty much a fully functioning game here. We have gameplay, we have levels, we have goals, and we've come a long way in a short period of time. We still got a ways to go. We're going to still create a start menu. We are going to create a game over. We still got to fix our ranger up, make sure that he can shoot arrows at us, and so we still got some cool stuff to do. But I hope you're enjoying it so far. Go ahead and give this a play. See how high you can get. See if you can actually get to level 20. And so yeah, this is Johnny B with Devslopes.com, and we'll see you in the next one.